Hey, we're back again with DPE Peyton Enloe for another episode of Flight Tales. Woo!
Woo.
There we go.
If I remember correctly, last time I was here, we had just landed on Interstate 10 and gotten run over by an 18-wheeler because we didn't know that carb heat was alternate air.
That's right.
That's where we ended last time.
But now we know.
But now we know. So let's talk about runway incursions.
Okay.
Just as a starting point, the FAA's guidance to pilot examiners is that if the applicant moves the airplane without the airport diagram visible, it's an automatic unsatisfactory.
Oh, really?
So that just is an example of the emphasis that we're putting on runway incursions.
Yeah. See, I always thought a runway incursion definition, I guess, for air traffic would be if you cross the whole short line or enter a runway you haven't been cleared to cross.
Landing on the wrong runway is a runway incursion also.
Yeah, that could be.
Not something you normally think about.
No.
Or actually landing without clearance is a runway incursion.
So what I always understood, as long as your wheels, like say you did line up on the wrong runway, you haven't touched down yet, but you may be like 50 feet off the ground. If you go around, is that considered a runway incursion?
No.
Okay. As long as your wheels don't touch the ground, you're good. Or if you got a clearance, like you realize, oh, I'm on the wrong runway, and you could request a clearance to land from tower, and they give you the clearance. That's you're good, right?
You're good.
Yeah.
But the typical runway incursion scenario is one during taxi where you cross the whole short line without clearance.
Yeah. Okay.
So we need to make sure that our students have the taxi diagram out, they understand their taxi instructions, preferably have them written down, and follow them when they're taxiing out. You mentioned the landing without clearance thing. That's something I don't have in my notes here, but it's a common problem. And I'm sure you've experienced it where during training, typically it's on an instrument training flight where you're doing a practice approach and ATC's busy, they forget to hand you off to the tower.
Yeah.
We've all had it happen.
Yeah.
If you land, if you're not talking to the tower and you land without clearance, then that's going to be a problem also.
Yeah.
We have to make sure we as instructors have the situational awareness to realize, have we been cleared to land or not? A method that a lot of people use is the landing light.
Yeah.
When they get cleared to land, they turn their landing light on.
Yeah. We over here when we're doing training, sometimes tower is, but they're not busy. So we'll get handed off the tower about 5 miles out, and then they'll clear us to land if they don't have it. And so I always forget because 5 miles in a Cessna 172 takes a little while, I usually ask a student, hey, did they clear us to land? Yeah. Or if we're not sure, we usually ask again, ask tower. I forget about the landing light thing.
Well, it's just a technique some people use, but it's an easy mistake to make, especially when it's busy.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you land and you switch to ground and ground control says, were you cleared to land? And you look back and you see your last frequency was approach control rather than the tower. And at that point, there's a problem. So it's a situational awareness thing. Keep in mind, as the flight instructor, you're the PIC and you get the violation.
Yeah.
I'm a DPE. I'm never the PIC. So I don't get violated, but I'm not going to let them land without clearance. But if I have to tell them to contact ATC,
that would be a failure then.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you had to get involved.
Right.
So would that be a failure if somebody didn't have the airport diagram out, since the FAA is so strong about, once you get your taxi clearance, you should have your taxi diagram out, airport diagram out?
Well, you would want it out after you land and stop and go through your after landing checklist. Then the taxi diagram comes back out, so you don't have a runway incursion taxiing back in.
Okay. So, So going the other way, say you're taxiing out, both ways you need to have the diagram.
Exactly.
Out.
Yeah, definitely. Big emphasis area.
Yeah.
A stable approach. Now, another big emphasis area now. And I'm finding a lot of people don't have any parameters for what is a stable approach. We probably need to set some guidelines, some targets to hit at a specific altitude in order to make the decision, are we stable or unstable at some point during the approach. As far as I know, the FAA hasn't published any specific numbers in terms of at what altitude you should be stable.
Mm-hmm.
But a good number is probably 300 feet. I mean, if you're not stable by 300 feet, don't hit all the targets that are required to be stable, then you should make a go around. This is a huge emphasis area, and all the airlines, all the major corporations and 135 operators now have incorporated a call out into their procedures, where typically in a 2-pilot operation, the non-flying pilot has a call out. Let's just say in this case, it's at 300 feet, where he says 300 stable. If he says unstable, you have to go around.
Oh, okay.
There's no, we're fine. We can make it.
Yeah.
An unstable call out is a mandatory go around. So we need to be making sure that people, even at the private level, understand what a stable approach is and have the decision-making process to go around if they're unstable.
Yeah.
So what's a stable approach? There are several parameters that we need to hit. Obviously, speed is one of them.
Yeah.
We have to decide how far off speed we're going to let our students be before they determine it's unstable. General consensus is no more than -5 plus 10. In other words, if the approach speed is 70, we don't want to be any faster than 80 or any slower than 65 at the 300 feet is what we're talking about in this case. So speed is a parameter. Runway alignment, airplane fully configured.
What about altitude? Because I mean, somebody could be really high
on glide path. If there is a visual indicator of the glide path, we want to be on it. If we're using an electronic glide path, we want to be on it. Rate of descent, certainly no more than 1,000 feet a minute at 300 feet. That's probably a bit much. Probably 700 feet a minute, something like that. So we need to give them targets to hit, and we need to give them an altitude at which, if they're don't hit all of those targets, they make the decision to go around.
We have to try to be able to give them that decision, or give them the opportunity to say, I'm going to go around because I'm not stable.
Exactly.
Because the student has to.
Now, obviously, in the beginning, when you're first teaching somebody how to do a normal approach, they're going to be unstable, and you may let them go ahead and land anyway, just to show them. Notice how much longer we landed because you were fast at 300 feet. Or you were high. You let them see the result. But we want to get them to the correlation level of learning where they're able to recognize an unstable approach, certainly by the time they're ready to take a check ride, and have the ability to make the decision to go around based on being unstable.
Short field, soft field, normal landings, crosswind landings, all the landings in the ACS say you have the opportunity to go around. Or you can go around if it's an unstabilized approach.
Yes, and you should.
Yeah. But except for the slip to landing, I don't think it says
a go around in the check ride environment can only save a powered approach where the engine is running, because you can't go around if the engine's not running. Yeah. So a power off 180 is a power off maneuver. A forward slip to a landing is generally considered to be a power off maneuver. A simulated engine failure, a go around can't save that. Yeah. Obviously, we're going to go around if we're going to come up short of the runway, but at that point, it's an unsatisfactory maneuver. Yeah. But any powered approach, a go around is an option.
It's an option. And people forget that too on the check ride. They don't.
I always make a point of bringing that up in the pre-flight briefing, that the go around is an option on any powered approach. Okay. So there's no reason for them not to know they can go around.
Yeah. So if they know those marks they're supposed to hit and they realize they're not hitting one, if they go around, you don't dock them for it.
No, they actually get a gold star, because it's a good decision. Right. We're looking not just for their ability to fly the airplane, but the decision-making process is a big part of it too. They've decided this is an unstable approach. I'm going to go around, and that's what they should do.
I mean, that's what the FAA wants everybody to do, to make those decisions.
But it sounds like if I were to read, you have the option to go around. Yeah. But I'm like, okay, it's not perfectly stable, but I can still land it. The option to go around doesn't sound like you should go around if you'd like to pass this test. Yes. It just sounds like you have the option if it's if you're not comfortable landing. Yeah. So it's like, oh, go around.
Well, and on the short field, there's a specific point you're supposed to touch down on. And you have that point plus 200 feet. So if you're not going to make that point, go around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the short field landing, when you look at it in the ACS, does not specify an obstacle. You can put an obstacle in if you want to. I normally don't use an obstacle, because if you use an obstacle, it takes away the ability to touch down at the end of the runway.
Oh, okay.
Close to the end of the runway.
Yeah. Yeah,
now,
they have to stay high, and then
if you really have a short runway, there may or may not be an obstacle, but the whole point I'm trying to make here is that they need to be able to put the airplane on the runway, touch down wherever they want to, and we should be able to go out with a chalk and make an X on the runway anywhere we want to, and the applicant should be able to put the wheels on that X.
Yeah.
Whether it's the numbers, the 1,000-foot marker, or anywhere on the runway, if they have the technique to control their glide path and their speed, they should be able to touch down on speed on that X. If you give them a short field landing with no obstacle, now they should be able to put the airplane on the numbers. You really need to be able to touch down on or before the numbers.
Yeah.
If you really have a short runway with no obstacle. And I typically give them a simulated short runway. Rather than just say, I want to see a short field landing, I'll say, based on our takeoff distance, we lifted off right at the 1,000-foot markers. You should be able to land and stop in the same distance that you took off. Because we've done a performance calculation before we take off. In a 172, as an example, if you're not using an obstacle, the landing distance is always shorter than the takeoff distance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
By 200 or 300 feet, typically. Yeah. So the point is, we should be able to land in the same distance we took off if we're doing everything correctly.
Yeah.
Now, typically a private pilot, I don't expect them to do it in exactly the same distance. I'll give them a little extra. I might say, let's stop. We need to be stopped by the top of the 1,000-foot markers. That's 1,200 feet.
Yeah.
So now they have a short runway to land and stop in. If they go past the top of the 1,000-foot markers, they're off the end of the runway.
Yeah.
So knowing those parameters, if they see that they're high or fast at 300 feet, they're not going to make it.
They need to go around.
They need to go around.
Yeah.
What typically happens after we land and we run off the simulated end of the runway, and I say, when you saw you were going to touch down halfway down your available runway, why did you land?
Yeah.
I said, well, I thought I had to.
Oh.
Which tells me their instructor has not been teaching the go-around decision based on being unstable. In this case, unstable is because they're either high or fast at 300 feet. I'm talking about a guy who now should be proficient enough to pass a check ride. He should have that decision-making process in place.
He should have.
I'm unstable, I'm high, I'm fast, I'm not going to land because I won't get it stopped in time.
Is there a certain amount of go-arounds you allow before you're like, all right, just land?
Probably, but I don't know what that number is right off the top of my head.
So like after 14,
after the third or fourth one, you start wondering, is this going to happen or not?
Gotcha.
I don't think I don't remember anybody ever going around more than 4 times.
Yeah,
for one maneuver, landing.
For one maneuver. Yeah.
So that's a good point, though. Like, even if you got to do it twice, it's okay.
Well, it's all part of the stable approach concept. If I'm unstable, I'm going to go around. So if they understand what a stable approach is, and they have a point at which if they are not stable in every way they go around, that's what we want to teach them.
Yeah, I think we have talked before. You had mentioned before that, older instructors teach the whole stay close enough to the runway, so if you lose an engine, you can just make the runway.
Well, the mindset used to be we always need to be in gliding distance of the runway in case we have an engine failure. That's no longer the way we train in the traffic pattern. I mean, if we had that mindset, we'd never leave the traffic pattern.
Yeah, that's right.
So a lot of older flight instructors, myself included, when I was taught to fly, a normal approach was a power-off gliding approach. It was basically a power-off 180.
Yeah.
Can't do a stable approach power-off now, so that whole concept has changed.
Yeah.
What a normal approach should be a stable approach. It's not written that way in the ACS. It doesn't say normal stable approach, but a normal approach is, by its definition, also a stable approach.
Yeah.
We talked about the go-around decision, and I think we've covered that adequately. While we're on the subject of a go-around decision, we probably also need to think about the decision to abort the takeoff.
Oh, yes. Yes, we probably should talk about that.
As multi-engine pilots, every time we roll onto the runway, we're thinking aborted takeoff.
Yeah.
We actually brief it before every takeoff. What's going to cause us to abort? But in the single-engine world, aborted takeoffs are not being taught.
No.
And usually the aborted takeoff in the single engine world is not an engine problem, because if the engine's running rough, you're probably going to abort automatically.
Yeah.
And I've had people abort because of a rough running engine, but I've never had anybody abort for loss of directional control.
Oh, yeah. I
when
guess
they should have.
Yeah.
And that's the typical issue that I see in the single engine world is
like a crosswind takeoff and they're not controlling the plane.
It's typically a soft field takeoff where we have a lot of left turning tendency going on, and the airplane wants to go to the left anyway. Now we got a crosswind from the right trying to blow the airplane off the left side of the runway.
Mm-hmm.
The applicant starts the takeoff. The airplane, he's not anticipating the crosswind or the left turning tendency. The airplane is now headed off the runway. Mm-hmm. It's going to go off.
Yeah.
It's headed off. When he sees that, his mindset is not to abort. His mindset is, I got to get this thing off the ground before I go off the runway. And now he pulls it off at too slow a speed. You've probably seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. They actually, I've seen there's a YouTube video with a guy who, I think he was a solo student, and he started to veer off the runway, but instead he added power and didn't have enough airspeed to lift off, and he just kind of veered off and ran into a hangar.
I've seen that video.
Yeah.
He went a long way.
Yeah, he went way farther
off.
than he should.
He was more than 100 yards off the runway.
Yeah.
Well, all he would have had to do is pull the power back and
pull
abort.
the power and hit the brakes. And
so we need to give our applicants, our students, some criteria for what constitutes loss of directional control.
Yeah.
If it's me as my student, I'm going to tell him, anytime one of the main wheels crosses the center line and you can't at least parallel the center line, abort.
Yeah.
Because you've lost directional control. I'd like to be getting back towards the center line, but if I can't at least parallel it, if I'm continuing to diverge from center line, I'm going to pull the power back and stop.
And like learning here, we got 150 feet wide runway, so you've got a lot of room. But if you're in Abbeville, you don't have that much.
Well, that's why regardless of how wide the runway is, you still need to make them keep it on the center line.
Yeah.
As though they were on a narrow runway.
Yeah. That's why I like to take people to Abbeville, or I used to take people to Jeanerette because it's so much shorter than it's the length is shorter. It's I think the width is about the same as Abbeville, but also you have to make sure you stay on center line.
So loss of directional control is probably the most common mistake I see people make that they don't abort for. Another one that comes up occasionally is slower than normal acceleration. Maybe the brakes are on.
Yeah.
Maybe we have a flat tire, which is probably going to give us directional control problems also, but slower than normal acceleration is something we need to think about. Usually that involves a rough running engine, but it could be something else.
Yeah.
Carpet on.
Well, since we had the accident here.
Perfect example.
Yeah. We've been talking about, so where are you going to abort? If you have in a 172, it should take you about 1,000 feet. But say you go a little bit farther, where would you abort? And everybody, we've all said 2.9. We're going to abort. If we not off by 2.9 or 1.1, we're going to abort. In the Cirrus, we always, that's part of our takeoff briefing is it should take us, 2,000 feet or whatever the takeoff distance is. Because in the Cirrus, you have the takeoff chart in the G1000. So we always look at it right before we take off during our run-up.
Another thing we should consider is any perception that the airplane's not going to fly. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, I pull back on the yoke and nothing happens because the control lock's in.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in a 172, it's pretty hard to take off with the control lock.
Yeah, it's right there in front of you. Yeah.
But a lot of airplanes don't have the block over the ignition key, so it's just a pin that goes through the yoke. And there are accidents every year where people take off with the control lock in, and they're always fatal.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to get the control lock out once you're off the ground.
Yeah.
You can't find the sweet spot.
That's what I was going to ask. So once you're in the air, it's almost impossible to take it.
So there's always things that lead up to it. Obviously, if you take off with a control lock in, you didn't do a control check before you took off. So that reemphasizes use of the checklist.
Yeah, thorough pre-flight.
And quite often, it's very experienced pilots this happens to. They're in a hurry. They're not using the checklist.
Yeah.
They don't do a control check, and they end up with a control lock in.
Mm-hmm.
So,
you got to realize that it's locked like as soon as you get in the air, huh?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when they freak out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's a quick crash.
There are YouTube videos
of it
that
happening.
show airplanes taking off with a control lock in, and it always pulls up. It always stalls and rolls over and comes down and crashes.
Because you can't do anything. Like it literally locks.
Yeah, it locks it into a certain spot and you can't move it. And then to try to get it out, you have to jiggle the controls and the lock at the same time. And, you know, I mean, it's all happening very fast and you're flying the airplane.
Well,
you know?
This emphasizes the importance of using the checklist, because if you're using the checklist, you will always, I've never flown an airplane that didn't call for a control check before you take off.
Yeah. Yeah, me neither.
That alone is enough to save your life. But as you know, in high performance airplanes, there are things that will kill you if they're not set correctly on takeoff.
Yeah.
Trim is a good example, where you're trimming the whole stabilizer in a jet. If you take off with the trim set full down, the airplane won't rotate. You can't pull back far enough on the yoke to get the airplane to fly.
Yeah.
And you're going to go off the end of the runway at high speed, probably in that case, unless you have a really long runway and make the decision to abort.
Yeah.
Because there's no perception the airplane's not going to fly. If you take off with the trim set too far up, you can't push the nose down. You're going to, those airplanes are trim critical. You can't overpower the trim.
And then that's usually like in the Lear, you had, once you start adding takeoff power, you had a warning that went off to let you know if the trim's not right or the flap's not set right or whatever.
Exactly.
Takeoff configuration.
So trim can kill you. Flap setting can do it too. You try to take off in a jet with no flaps, you're going to use a lot more runway and it may not climb once you get off the ground. So my point here is that even though we're not flying jets now, we need to make sure our students understand that these are things that we're emphasizing strongly now because they can kill you later.
Yeah.
You have to use the checklist. You got to hit all these items and make it a habit, because later on you have to do it.
Yeah. Always use your checklist.
Absolutely. Can't use it too much. You can only use it not enough. Let's talk about stalls. A common error I see on the power off stall is people don't enter a descent before they do the maneuver.
Yeah. I'm big on trying to make sure everybody does. And it says in the ACS, establish a stabilized descent.
It does.
And they want to just pull their power, set their flaps, and then go straight into the stall without showing a descent to land.
Well, when you and I learned how to fly, the primary focus during stall recovery was to do it with minimum loss of altitude.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Everything was about minimum loss of altitude.
Yeah.
That's no more. The FAA now is emphasizing, let's get the nose down. We're going to lose some altitude, but we do not want to get a secondary stall. So minimum loss of altitude is no longer emphasized like it used to be.
So there's no just get the nose down and, get the power in. Let's start a climb.
That's right. Let's recover without a secondary stall.
Yeah.
And a lot of this came about because there were people stalling airplanes at altitude, at high altitude. Typically, it was an airplane that was trying to climb up over the weather at too high a weight, based on the temperature, or they're just trying to get up and get more favorable winds. But in any case, they get the airplane up to altitude. They level off. Now, of course, they're IFR. We're talking about being up in the high 30s or 40s.
Yeah.
They get the airplane leveled off. They turn the autopilot on, and then they quit paying attention, and the airplane is slowly decelerating.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing you know, the stick shaker goes off. And now the pilots are, they've typically punched the autopilot off. They try to recover without losing more than 300 feet of altitude, so they don't get an altitude bust. They get a secondary stall, and now the airplane rolls over and comes down and loses 10,000 feet, they don't recover at all.
Yeah.
So after a few events like that, the FAA rethought stall recoveries, and now they're emphasizing, let's recover without a secondary stall. Yes, we're going to lose some altitude. And now all the people flying jet airplanes who are taking simulator training, which is almost everybody that does that, they're doing stalls at altitude now. They actually have you climb up to high altitude, put the autopilot on, pull the throttles back to idle, and just sit and wait until you get the stall. and they're having to do the recovery from that scenario. Autopilot's on, airplane's leveled off, gradually slowing down. So we're practicing stalls at altitude now, which we didn't used to do.
Yeah.
I don't know when you did your Learjet training. When I did my initial jet type ratings, we were practicing stalls in a simulator, but they were all 15,000 feet or below.
Yeah, and they would tell you just fly out of it,
Exactly.
add full
power out, don't even
just
lower the nose,
no.
just blast out of it with power.
Which is different from primary training, because when you're a private pilot or just learning how to fly, it's always lower the nose, add the power.
But now, even in the high performance airplanes in the simulator, it's we're not going to power out. We're going to lower the nose.
Yeah.
We're going to get a descent going. We're going to lose some altitude. We're going to get it flying. No secondary stall.
Yeah.
So we want to emphasize that now, even at the private level.
Yeah. Make sure they do all that.
But we were talking primarily about the entry.
Yeah.
I mean, I see a lot of people, they're getting the nose down. They're not trying to power out. They're just failing to put the airplane in a descent before they do the stall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I see that a lot because, before we always try to put everybody through a kind of a mock check ride before we send them to you.
Now, I'm not seeing it here because we've been working together long enough that we've worked out a lot of these problems. But I do see people coming in to take check rides who have never done a power on stall in a turn. They've only done it wings level.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's simulating like you're coming out on the turning crosswind or...
Right. I mean, the ACS calls out, it can be done in up to 20 degrees of bank, left or right or wings level. I'm seeing a lot of people have never done it in a turn. And on check ride day, if they've never done it in a turn, they're going to be doing it for the first time on their check ride. And that's usually not the best way to do it.
Yeah. They'll probably, do you get it into a spin? Do you have those where you do a check ride and they
I have had that happen. I typically, because it's worst case scenario, choose the power on stall and a climbing turn to the left, because that's the most likely scenario too if you're going to be doing it in a turn, because typically we make left traffic.
Yeah.
So the scenario is we've taken off, we're making a left turn to crosswind, and the seat slides back.
Yeah.
And we get a big pull on up elevator and we stall the airplane. So that's climbing turn to the left. And of course, in that particular maneuver, typically you're using some right rudder to keep the ball centered because of all the left turning tendencies that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
If they're using left rudder in a left turn like they normally do, we're in a skid.
Yeah.
And if you stall the airplane in a skid,
you're going to spin.
That's it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of value in teaching it in a turn, especially to the left, because it is worst case scenario and we want them to know what to do if that happens.
Yeah.
And it also emphasizes the fact that we need to keep the ball centered all the time.
Mm-hmm. I try to teach everybody to look outside on the nose whenever they're doing the stalls, because I see a lot of people try to stare at the ball.
Yeah.
It ends up being a spin or the entry of one, because they don't look outside.
Well, as they get a little experience, they should be able to feel the out of trim situation too, without even having to look at the ball. You can feel it.
Yeah.
So stall recoveries need to be taught in a turn.
Yeah.
Left and right and wings level. The most common error I see people make on steep turns is they don't control their speed. They're not even looking at the speed. They're only thinking altitude and bank angle.
Oh.
And they may lose 20 knots or gain 20 knots during the maneuver, depending on what they do with the power. So we need to emphasize the fact that speed is part of the maneuver also.
Maneuver and speed, I guess.
Well, whatever speed you enter it at. If you enter it at 90, you need to stay at 90.
Yeah. I had a guy I was checking the other day, and he had, ended up started to getting into the yellow arc because he wasn't controlling the speed at all. We were kind of diving down, and he was trying to correct for nose down.
It's not always an altitude loss that's causing the speed to change. It's the fact they're not doing anything with the power when they roll into the maneuver, or they're adding too much, either adding too much or too little.
Yeah.
If a guy just rolls in and goes to full throttle, it's probably going to be too much.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was the case with him too. He had it pretty much close to red line, on the throttle.
So the speed part of that maneuver I think is getting overlooked in training to a certain degree. They're only focusing on let's not lose any altitude and let's keep this bank angle around 45 degrees, not even looking at speed. The simulated engine failure maneuver, typically it's done with some altitude.
Yeah.
You've been up doing your air work, you finish that, you're up around 2,500 feet or higher. And in my personal technique is to do it over a place where we have a place to land.
Oh, yeah. I think we talked about that last time. Well, the reason why you do that.
Well, yeah, actually, you do have a place to land. Plus, it gives you a better feel for the applicant's ability to manage energy. I mean, if you give them, if they have a crop duster strip to go to as an example, they have to be able to manage the energy of the airplane to put it in a specific spot. I've found if you let them pick their own field, and there's some value in doing it that way because we want to teach them how to pick fields, into the wind, long enough, wide enough, smooth enough, obstacles. But what I'm finding in the Checkride environment, if I let them pick their own field, and after I ask them, where are you going to go? They say, well, I'm going to that green field down there. And I go, well, they're all green. Well, I'm going to the green field that's got the fence along the side. Well, they all have fences. I'm never really sure where they're going. And I have a feeling they're changing it on me at the last minute. So when I pick the field for them and they have a specific place to go to, it gives me a much better feel for their ability to put the airplane where they want it. Yeah. Plus, we have a place to go if something actually goes wrong.
Well, I started taking, when I'm doing the pre-solo checks, I'll go fly with somebody and we'll go to Opelousas. Usually there's no traffic in Opelousas. So I'll say, all right, Opelousas is your field. I want you to land there. And so I do it so they can have the idea of like the perception of, if they're going to make it or not going to make it. I mean, we have to land on the runway. So, and most of the time they're short because they don't, they think the plane will glide farther than it really will, or maybe they're high because they don't add in flaps, But when I was training, we did the field. You would just pull the engine. My instructor would pull the throttle back, and you'd pick a field, and we would line up for it. You never knew if you were really going to make it or not because you just, I think you'd make it, and then go around. And
because you never actually land in the field.
Never actually land. Exactly. You never actually land. So I always try to take people to Opelousas so that they can, you have to land.
Take it all the way to the ground.
Yeah, all the way to the ground. Yep.
That's good. That's a good way to do it.
When y'all test them on that, that's why it's a spot, or how? You don't have them land in a field.
No.
So I missed how that works.
Well, I picked the field. I typically find a crop duster strip or a grass strip out there somewhere, put them over that field or close to it, and give them a simulated engine failure. And I've told them that's where I want to go.
Gotcha.
That way they have to maneuver the airplane so that they are able to put it on that field.
And you can tell whether or not they land on that field.
Yeah, well, I mean, typically we take them down to about 500 feet or so, and at 500 feet, you can tell whether they're going to make it or not, and then have them go around from there.
Gotcha. Has anybody ever landed thinking you wanted them to land?
Well, no, because I tell them when to go around. Okay. This is where we get to see a go around, which is a required maneuver on the Checkride. So at the bottom of the simulated engine failure, there's a go around, which checks the go around box if we haven't seen one sooner. Typically, an airplane's a glider when the engine's not running, and so the technique that glider pilots use is probably the best one of all, where all our maneuvering is designed to put us downwind, a beam of our point of touchdown at about 1,000 feet. Now it's just a power off 180. Mm-hmm. That takes all the guesswork out of it.
You can figure out where to put your flaps in, and if you're too high or whatever.
I mean, if you can put yourself in position to do a power off 180 and you're good at power off 180s, you're going to make it every time. It takes all the guesswork out of it. As opposed to you're high, you're right over the airport where you want to land. So instead of circling down to put yourself in that position, you just try to fly a big traffic pattern. There's guesswork involved in that.
Yeah. Yeah. What's it called?
It's called the WAG method.
Yeah, the WAG method.
It works sometimes, but not always, whereas the other method works most of the time. It's a better way to do it. That's a military term. It was when I went through military flight training. Well, I'm thinking about military flight training, and I realize we're not in the military here, but one thing that they made us do, and if you didn't do it, you're going to get rapped on the head by your flight instructor, is always say, clear left, clear right. every time before you turned. It gets a little repetitive, but I have found that if I say clear left, clear, I'm going to look.
It makes
and if
you
I
look.
say clear right,
Look.
it makes you look.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good technique. I don't see many people doing that, but it's it works.
Yeah.
You and Brendan were talking about saying things out loud so that you will do them, like stuff on your checklist.
Well, we were talking about takeoff briefings and making sure, you kind of having an emergency plan in case.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, talking about if you vocalize the emergency plan before you take off, then you're more likely to do it if you did have an emergency.
Well, it brings up another point, and that's the midair avoidance. I mean, when I'm out doing check rides or when I'm in the traffic pattern doing flight training or just flying myself around, I worry more about midairs than I do about anything else. I don't worry about engine failures much. I don't worry about crosswind landings or, things that I have control over. But a midair is going to ruin your day.
Yeah. I would say.
And there's plenty of opportunity to have midairs
in
some of the airports where we operate around here where there's lots of conflicting traffic.
Yeah.
I mean, in Abbeville, we have helicopters coming straight in from offshore, not entering the traffic pattern. When we're landing to the north down there and we're on left base and there's helicopters coming straight in, there's plenty of conflict.
Fish spotters.
Yeah,
those guys.
I worry more about midairs than anything else in terms of safety.
I think that's one of the questions on the written is that when most likely to have an accident, and the answer is on a clear day.
That's exactly right.
Day,
Well, you got to look. You got to keep your eyes open. And that clear left, clear right thing goes a long way. You'd be surprised how many people I see making turns without looking.
Yeah. I'm probably bad with that too,
It's just a habit with me.
Yeah.
Clear left, clear right. I always do it. It goes a long way towards preventing midairs.
Yeah.
Talk about a nightmare scenario.
Yeah,
I mean,
no.
One of your training airplanes has a midair in Abbeville and everybody gets killed?
Yeah.
How's that going to be?
Yeah, that's not going to be good at all.
No. And I'm that's an extreme example, but it can happen. It does happen. And we've got to keep our eyes open.
Yeah.
Especially in the flight training and the traffic pattern. That's where it's going to happen, probably.
Yeah.
The only other maneuver I have on my list here about VFR, common weak areas I see, 8s on pylons.
Okay. Yeah.
Commercial maneuver.
Yeah.
8s on pylons?
8s on pylons. It's a maneuver you have to do on a commercial check ride.
It's a ground reference maneuver.
It's a ground reference. Actually, you don't have to do it. There are other ground reference maneuvers you can do, but I mean, typically 8s on pylons end up getting done.
Yeah.
It's not a maneuver we practice a lot because it's really only applicable to the commercial check ride. And the typical picking pylons is the hardest part of the maneuver, it seems like. If you get them too close together, it's impossible. It's better to have them too far apart. But other than picking pylons, the most common error I see people are doing it at too shallow a bank angle. They're too far away from the pylon.
Yeah.
When you look at it in the airplane flying handbook, it shows doing it with 30 to 40 degrees of bank is typically where we want to be. If you're doing it with 10 or 15 degrees of bank, you're so far from the pylon that it really doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
So you need to be in fairly close to the pylon when you roll in on it. You need to roll into about 30 to 40 degrees of bank initially. It makes the maneuver work a whole lot better.
I think in the ACS it says don't exceed 40 degrees or 45 or something.
It says 40, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But 40 is a lot. I mean, you got to be pretty close in when you roll into one on 40.
On top of it, pretty much. Yeah. That's I'm sure a lot of people spend a lot of time just trying to find pylons, just flying around, and because you got to find the right distance.
And you're supposed to pick the pylons before you start the maneuver. I see people who pick their first pylon and they say, well, I'm going to pick the first one and I'll pick the second one as I come around the corner.
Oh, here. Yeah.
Now, when I'm teaching somebody how to pick pylons, I may use that technique just to give them a feel for how far apart the pylons should be.
Yeah.
But once they've got a basic understanding of how far apart they should be, they need to be able to pick them before they start the maneuver. And we're supposed to start a downwind between pylons too, once we get the pylons picked. You want to do it with more than 10 degrees of bank.
Yeah.
That's a common mistake I see people make. Too shallow a bank angle. I see people mixing up 8s around pylons with 8s on pylons. They're two separate maneuvers.
And that's in the flying handbook, but I don't really, I mean, we're not tested on 8s around pylons.
Could be.
Oh. Okay.
Now you will be.
Well, now you will be.
8s around pylons are 2 turns around a point joined together.
Okay.
Trying to stay an equal distance from the pylon rather than keep the wingtip on it.
Yeah.
Which one's more difficult? If you know what you're doing, they should be the same. I get it.
That's right.
Yeah, they're both easy.
Yeah.
I can do them with my eyes closed. No, they are. They're different maneuvers, but as far as the difficulty goes, I would say they're about the same.
Yeah. I mean, in the private, you can be tested on ground reference maneuvers, turns around a point, and you've got like turns around a point, rectangular course, and S turns, which is all like changing your bank angle to keep your same distance around the point. It's a little bit different than commercial 8s on pylons.
I did have an interesting experience. This is kind of humorous, but
if it's like
it was a little bit of a windy day, not too bad. You know, the winds were probably 8 gusting to 12, something like that. This particular applicant was having a problem turning from base to final and lining up with a runway.
Yeah.
The first one was a huge overshoot. The second one was slightly better, and then the third one was an undershoot. So he was not having much luck getting the airplane lined up with the runway. And I pointed that out to him. I said, when we turn final, we need to be lined up with the runway. And his response was, "The wind's got me."
Okay. Well, you're the pilot.
Well, I found that. I said, "The wind's got you," and he said, "Yes, the wind's got me."
Yeah.
So I guess that's a reason for not being lined up with the runway, but it's probably not a good reason.
No. He should have just not answered.
Yeah, he should have just stayed quiet.
Because he kept going around, which is the right thing to do.
So maybe that, anytime you mess a maneuver up, you can just say the wind's got me.
The wind's got me. Okay.
I guess he passed.
I'm not sure it's going to work with me, but I did find it humorous, in that particular event.
So if you want to make Peyton laugh, tell him the wind's got you.
The wind's got me. Now, while we're on the subject of humorous events, since we're short on time, I'll give you one more. This was on an instrument rating Checkride, and we were headed out to a micro to hold. So it's 16 miles. It takes a little while to get out there, and we're cruising along. The applicant's over there drawing pictures on his knee board. I'd given him a non-standard holding pattern. I gave him something other than the one that's published. And so he was drawing pictures, and he looks over at me and says, "Do you mind if I make a phone call?"
Stop.
What is he going to call? Is it a phone
I said,
yeah.
"Well, do you have a problem?" He said, "Yes, I'm not sure how to get in this holding pattern. I'm going to call my instructor."
Oh, no.
No way.
Well, that was the first, and it kind of tickled me, So I'm sitting here thinking, is that cheating or is that good crew resource management?
I don't know.
If you got lost commo or you got a problem and you're in cell phone distance,
that's true.
You're going to use your phone. So I decided to let it play out. I said, "Go ahead, call him." He got his voicemail.
Oh, no. Now what you going to do?
Ultimately, he did get into the holding pattern okay.
Yeah.
When we got back on the ground, the instructor said, "You tried to call me?"
The last thing the instructor expects, too.
I wouldn't expect anybody to
So
call
I'm
me.
not recommending that you teach your students to call you if they're having trouble on the Checkride, but that was kind of a humorous moment.
What was that show that you phone a friend?
Who wants to
be a millionaire?
That's right. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, but also at the same rate, don't be afraid to call your instructor if you're flying solo and you need some help.
There are times when making a phone call is the appropriate thing to do, no doubt. Lost commo is a good example.
Yeah. Call the tower.
Call the tower.
That's right.
Can I make a?
Can I make a phone call?
Just that's how vague it was. You might help me.
We can end with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I got my list of stuff for instrument check rides for next time.
All right. If you've made it this far, you listened to the entire episode. And for that, we would just like to say thank you, and we hope you enjoyed it. We would also like to thank today's special guest, Peyton Enloe, for his awesome insight. If you have any questions about today's episode or suggestions for future episodes, just leave a comment or message us. If you'd like to check out some fun aviation videos, check out our YouTube channel at Owens Flight Training. Or if you'd like to get more information on becoming a safe, knowledgeable, and confident pilot, just head over to our website, owensflighttraining.com.